Hello, everyone. I am pleased once again to be interviewing via video another wonderful and eminent musician for my Muse in Music blog. And the subject of this topic is music for listening during quarantine, once again. And my guest is the illustrious Mark Kosower, who is the principal cello of the Cleveland Orchestra and a scholar and teacher of cello. His performance repertoire and discography includes Tchaikovsky's Rococo variations and concertos of Haydn, Walton, Elgar, and Dvorak, of course, as well as the concertos of Alberto Ginastera, Miklos Rocha, Frederick Golda, and Victor Herbert. Mr. Kosower has recorded for various record labels, including as the first cellist to record the complete music of solo cello for Ginastera on Naxos. In recent seasons, Mr. Kosower has been guest soloist with the Buffalo Philharmonic, the Canton Symphony, the Columbus Symphony, the Columbus Pro Musica, the Dayton Philharmonic, the Hawaii Symphony, Indianapolis Symphony, Naples Philharmonic, Phoenix Symphony, and the Toledo Symphony, among others, in addition to the 20 concerto appearances that he has done with the Cleveland Orchestra itself. He has performed as soloist with Herbert Blomstedt, Sir Andrew Davis, Christoph Eschenbach, and of course with Franz Welser-Most of the Cleveland Orchestra. So I am very, very pleased to be talking with Mark with respect to his recommended listening for quarantine. I do hope you enjoy this. Thank you so much, Mark, for talking with me in my Muse and Music blog about your recommended listening list for quarantine, especially because now we're all sort of suffering in the arts community and not being able to hear live music the way we used to. And so I just was wondering if you could start talking about, what do you recommend for people who view and read my blog for great performances and recordings and that might enrich their lives right now?
Well, it's a great thing you're doing, and it's a very interesting question right now. And when you asked me to do this, I was very enthusiastic about it because I have listened to a lot of recorded history, and there were so many great recordings. But then the question quickly came up: for what purpose would listening? So if we're listening to a recording during quarantine, what does that mean? And so I was trying to ask myself this question, and I came to the conclusion that it really depends on your current state of being. So, for example, if you have a lot of anxiety and feeling uncertain with everything swirling around and seems like things are unraveling in the world, then probably you would be looking for music that offers comfort and compassion. If you are really, that could be combined or separate. If you're feeling down because of everything, and the future doesn't look certain or bright, and it's looking rather depressed, then you'd want to be looking for inspirational music to lift you up. And if you're feeling pretty good, all things considered, and you feel like maybe you've been lucky in terms of the effects of things going on around you, then maybe, or perhaps, well, okay, first there's that. So if you're feeling pretty good, well, then maybe you could be more adventurous in your listening to things that may be a little, less comfortable. And also it depends on who you are. What if you're a person that have suffered a lot and lost, and maybe one of your ways of dealing with something uncomfortable in your life is to listen to uncomfortable music, and how maybe that uncomfortable piece eventually triumphs over those problems, which would be very much in line with romanticism and this music from the 19th century. So anyway, there's a lot of it depends on who you are, it depends on where you currently are, what state you're in, but and as to deciding how music should serve you or should enhance your life during this time. So I'll dive right into my list. So with saying all that, I can call myself Dr. Kosower, even though I'm not I don't have a PhD in anything, but but I can call myself a doctor in that I'm making recommendations and prescriptions for what you're for dealing with emotional feelings during this time. So, and when I look at my list, because I had to limit it to you know, a certain amount of time, it seems like it's very centered around the Viennese masters, but yeah, if you're a classical music person, and even if you're not, maybe it's not a bad place to start, since that some of the best music is from that period. But even a little bit before, of course, if starting my first recommendation, if you're looking for comfort and solace during a time like this, you know, I recommend a composer's music that I have been personally spending a lot of time with for the past 3 years in a project I started called Bach for Humanity. So the music of J.S. Bach. And it just so happened that when the COVID-19 pandemic struck, that some of the feelings I had that were a reflection of what was going on in society were kind of manifesting themselves within the pandemic crisis. But the music of Bach, yes, it's offered strength, comfort, compassion, triumph, and the best aspects of humanity, and to people going through difficult times for the 300 years during all the wars. Time and time again, people turn to the music of Bach for comfort. Also, there's obviously strong religious themes going through his music, Bach having been a devout Lutheran, but you don't have to be a religious person to reap the benefits from listening to this music. I think perhaps Glenn Gould put it best when he said, despite all its technical and scientific and mathematical brilliance, which perhaps may be the structures that help it to be, the perfection that gives us that inner stability and strength in our lives after listening to this music, it's actually the humanity found in the music, the very content that is of most value. And so, so with that being said, I have two recordings of a piece by Bach that I think offers as much solace and compassion as any music I know, and that's the Goldberg Variations.
Uh-huh.
And I chose two recordings, historical ones, one being older than the other. The first being Wanda Landowska, if you're familiar with the legendary harpsichordist, and by modern standards, her way of playing Bach on the harpsichord would not be, considered to be the period way or the authentic way to play it. But what's so striking, and why I recommend this recording, is because she literally makes the harpsichord sound like an organ. And by doing so, it's like a symphony orchestra on the harpsichord, and the depth of expression, the sound, and the profundity of her interpretation is really powerful. And this is recorded in the 40s. And the 1940s, you could say, was a time of turmoil in the world, to put it mildly.
Yeah.
And so, and I noticed at that time and the decades that followed, sound is always important in music, but big sound was in fashion, because that big sound gave people strength and comfort across the board through all composers and interpretations at the time. But so this is something I highly recommend. I found her performance of this to be, life-changing in many ways. The other recording I would recommend would be the if you don't, and also if you don't want to hear it on harpsichord and would rather hear it on piano,
Yeah.
I would recommend the undisputed master of Bach on piano, which is Glenn Gould himself. His 1982 CBS Masterworks recording is phenomenal. And of course, I'm giving, this is kind of old fashioned, I'm giving you the labels. You can find all of these on YouTube, of course. So,
Yeah, of course.
and Spotify and other platforms for music. But just I mention the labels because many of these great performers have multiple recordings of the same pieces, so you know which one I'm talking about. Now, moving on to the second piece of music I would recommend.
I'm sorry, before you
Yeah,
do that, I
yeah,
was
sure, go
wondering,
ahead.
could you maybe explain a little what about Glenn Gould's recording is so amazing and so significant to you?
Well, you know, profundity in music always comes from depth of knowledge and understanding. And, you know, Glenn Gould certainly is one of the great musical minds of the 20th century. And everything he played with a full knowledge of what he's doing. And it comes out in the playing, you know, in every aspect, whether it be, you know, the expression of the harmony, the real substance, phrasing, creation of characters, atmospheres. Yeah, I mean, it's that the substance of knowledge and the ability to convey that in a beautiful and illustrative way through sound. That's what makes a masterful interpretation. And so, yeah, I mean, it's you know, and with a lot of the greatest performances, I mean, I can listen to literally like 3 bars and you know it's going to be stunning. You know? I mean,
Yeah.
meaning you hear it right away. I mean, of course, you need to listen to the whole thing to really understand the music and have the full impact. But what I'm saying is, from the first note, it's everything is said from the beginning.
Hmm.
The
Absolutely.
depth of meaning, and so.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, thank you. Okay, so your next one.
Well, then, okay, and then if we're looking for inspiration in music, I turn to the Age of Enlightenment, and so into the classical era. And I was trying to think of, so what is, or what are some of the most inspiring pieces ever written? And I would have to say one of those pieces is Mozart's Symphony Number 41, the Jupiter.
Mhm.
There are lots of philosophical themes running through this music. I mean, it's written in C major, the key of salvation. And if that fugue in the last movement doesn't get you excited, I'm not really sure what will.
Sure.
I mean, and in a way, there's something, you know, I've said for a long time now that in a way, the classical style does not line up at all with contemporary life, because symmetry and you know, and classical architecture, it's the contemporary life is not lining up at all with that. But you know, with the greatest composers, they transcend time. And if we look at that fugue, there's something because of the complexity of it that in a way is harmonious with life in our current age, and just simply the idealism behind it, and it's, you feel like you're flying high when you listen to this music.
Yeah.
So, and I have 2 recordings recommendations for Mozart 41. Of course, there are many wonderful recordings. I'm a big fan of Fritz Reiner and the Chicago Symphony. Fritz Reiner was one of the greatest musicians in the 20th century. And despite how austere and severe he looks, if you close your eyes and listen to the music, you will hear more beauty and perfection than almost anyone else. I find this interpretation to be extremely electrifying, exciting, and really, as you would expect for Reiner, always a strong rhythmic component and rhythmically driven, but in a good way, in the character of the music. So that's a recording from the 1950s.
Okay.
Highly recommended. A side note, my teacher and mentor, Janos Starker, played for Reiner and is likely in this, I believe he's in this recording, playing as principal cello. The other recording of Mozart 41 I would recommend would be a new recording, 2 years old, with Herbert Blomstedt and the Bavarian Radio Orchestra.
Okay.
And I found their interpretation very interesting because you have modern European classical style string playing combined with an older musician, musical master, and the sort of the gravitas and weight that he brings to music making. Those two main aspects fused together. It's a very interesting and rich reading of the symphony. Uh, and again, that's with BR or BR Classics from 2018. Can
Okay.
be found on YouTube.
Okay. Wonderful. Thank you. Well, that Mozart 41, of course, is one of those pieces that I personally love. And you mentioned the fugue, of course. That is my favorite part of it. Where you have the the intellectual excitement of the fugue. I'm a professor, so I appreciate that from from that perspective. But I also just think it's like you were mentioning about Bach. Um, you combine the intellectual side of it, but also then the intense rhythmic and emotional vitality to that. And when you have the intellectual side and the emotional side melding like that, that piece always, for me, is very inspirational. So what you're saying really resonates with me. On top of that, too, then I haven't heard these two recordings, so I'll definitely take a listen because it sounds like they're able to capture the essence of what you're talking about. Really.
Right. It's
Intensely.
it's of course it's intellectual brilliance combined with intuitive excitement and just, yeah, inspiration. I mean, it's like, and as you find often in Mozart, but perhaps more in this symphony than or as much as in any other piece, just this unbelievable, yeah, inspiring atmosphere and mood and intensity to the music.
Very nice. Okay. Well, thank you. So what's your next one?
Um, Along the same lines, I thought, well, perhaps we need another piece or a few other pieces that also offer inspiration during COVID-19. Well, we moved to, you can't ignore the Beethoven symphonies. I mean, this some of the richest and greatest symphonic music ever written. And so, you could pick almost any of them and they would be inspirational and uplifting. Um, so I had to pick one, and we just had a great piece in C major. I could have gone with the Fifth Symphony, of course, the C minor, the Triumph to C major, but I chose the Seventh
Mhm.
because it offers something different if you're only going to take on a certain number of recordings. It's in A major. That A major is a very lofty key. It was regarded by the composers of themes of naivete, of innocent beauty, and in the case of this symphony, it's almost, yeah, it soars into the, you could, whatever you believe in, heavenly realms, or whatever it is. But and again, this, in Beethoven's case, this universal harmony, this idealism, the idea of yeah, universal harmony, everybody working together for a greater society, as he, of course, thought Napoleon was going to do when he dedicated the Third Symphony to him, and then realized he was a tyrant just like many other emperors. So,
Yeah.
but the Seventh Symphony, is, I mean, and but as with all great pieces, it's not all sunshine. There's a funeral march for, after all, for the second movement
Yes.
in A minor, and and with great works of art, all these pieces I'm mentioning, there are very strong messages being told through music that are life lessons, and you can put that into perspective with um, uh, the historical sort of context. I think it helps to think of COVID-19 very much. It helped me at the beginning. As soon as I started putting the period we're in into a much larger historical context and looking at, you know, whether it's the Spanish flu of 1918 or whether it's the two world wars or all these periods in American history and world history that seemed impossible to get through at the time, but the world got through and went on to even bigger and greater things. And so I think those messages can be found in great works of art, and perhaps no better than in the music of Beethoven, which always has inner struggle and the conquering of that struggle, which, you know, lays the foundation for romanticism that is a model for all the other great composers to follow for the next 100 years. So with Beethoven 7, the first recording I chose is an extremely famous one. Carlos Kleiber with the Vienna Philharmonic from 1976. My only criticism to the recording, and it's not really a criticism, it's more just for American ears, the pitch is a little high because whatever they're tuned to is up there. You know, it's higher. It's got to be at least 444 or 445. It's pretty high. But that's not uncommon in Central Europe. My former orchestra, the Bamberg Symphony in Germany, before coming to Cleveland, tuned at 443, and so that was it's just that it's different. But Carlos Kleiber is regarded as one of the greatest conductors of the last 25 years of the 20th century, or even 35 years. His career started before that. And some people even regard as the greatest conductor of these last 25 years. He verges on insanity at times, but a lot of the most dramatic interpretations are often presented and come from people who are a little on the fringe or the edge, because excitement and greatness sometimes lurks on the edges. Sorry. And when it's combined, of course, with a certain genius, which Carlos Kleiber certainly was. And the other recording for Beethoven 7 I would recommend is from another conductor some people consider the greatest of the last 25 years of the 20th century, and that is Mr. Claudio Abbado. And he has a recording with the Berlin Philharmonic from 2001, and this is at the very end of his tenure with the orchestra, and the musicians are really behind him and playing for him at this time, even more than before, because he was ill with cancer. Mm-hmm. And so everybody's really giving their all, and it's one of the great, if not greatest, orchestras in the world, and so the combination is pretty good.
Sure.
So that's those are my two picks for Beethoven 7. Also, this is Main Street for recorded history. There are umpteen other masterful interpretations.
Well, is there anything in either of those particular recordings, like in terms of tempo or interpretation or vitality or whatever, that draws you to them in particular, that was really stands out?
Yes, well, both are incredibly charismatic and inspirational performers, and I chose these two are contrasting in that Carlos Kleiber is an Austrian musician, and so his phrasing and architecture, and the shape of the phrase is more in the Germanic and specifically Austrian style, which is different from the Northern German style in German lands. And then by contrast, you have Claudio Abbado, the Italian, which is much more crisp with our articulations, or in a different type of articulations, but yet at the same time very much in step with this music. And so I think I chose two of the most charismatic conductors of that era, or of those 30-year span there. But they offer something different. Also, they have both have incredible polyphony and voicing. I mean, you hear things like in the Kleiber recording that you haven't heard before in other renditions. And that's always the sign of a original and great interpretation. And the same goes with Abbado. When you hear a piece you've heard many times and it sounds like you've never heard it before, that's
Yeah.
always really exciting.
I absolutely love that with some of my favorite recordings of music. When I've experienced that effect that you've talked about. One particular recording that I love that I always go back to is the Brahms piano concertos with George Szell and Fleischer.
Right, of course.
Orchestra. And that to me still is actually one of the few ones that I listen to of the Brahms piano concertos, simply because the tempi, for one thing. For me, if Brahms is too slow, I find it to be deadly, but that's just my prejudice. But also just, again, the intensity, the crispness, and then the polyphony, the voices, and hearing things in there that I hadn't heard from other recordings. And I'll add to that, I'm a composer myself, and when I take a piece to a great performer or to an orchestra that has really studied the music, and when they're able to bring out those things that I was really hoping they would, not everyone notices those lines. Not everyone notices always, the essential details that are so central to the construction of the music that the composer was thinking of. But when those details are brought out and conveyed in a really meaningful way, that's the best. That's just so wonderful. And some composers give more of a clue to what's important in the score than others. Of course, like with Mahler, you will know by looking at the score what's important, but you don't always know that because of earlier traditions, like in the Bach or the Mozart, they didn't mark it quite the same way. So then it's more up to the performer to figure all that out. So
one of my the most significant mentor in my life was János Starkers, the great Hungarian cellist, and he always spoke the three most important elements when interpreting and performing music. And this is, of course, with the backdrop of having great richness of complexity of knowledge and detail in the music. But he said simplicity, purity, balance. Those were the three most important aspects. And it's what you're talking about. All the richness and contrast and variety needs to be organized, presented in an immediately understandable way, and balanced in a way that everything can be heard and what's important comes out at all times. And that basically sums it up, I think.
Oh, that's wonderful. It's almost like a trinity there,
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Great. So what is your fourth recommendation?
Well, and again, I didn't want to leave Beethoven too quickly, because to me, Beethoven is a top 3 composer who ever lived. And a lot of people would probably agree with me. And I wanted to choose a piece from a different genre or instrumentation. And this would be this next piece I recommend would be a real piece that it is really clearly and firmly in the romantic, era. If I mean, seven is Beethoven's, the Seventh Symphony is as well, but this really is about compassion, overcoming personal struggle or outside struggles, and it's about the triumph of that over that. But to me, is it a triumph in this life or the next or on the way there? Because it's late Beethoven, and the piece is the string quartet, Opus 132.
Okay.
In A minor. And to me, it's almost like it's clear. I mean, it's clearly a late Beethoven quartet, but the way the structure unfolds in a way, it's straightforward, even though it's not. But it's very apparent, and it doesn't go off on tangents particularly anywhere. And so I kind of call it the middle Beethoven quartet of the late quartets.
Sure. Sure.
And then, of course, it's famous for having the Heiliger Dankgesang in it, which is, of course, the holy song of thanksgiving, and that Beethoven wrote in response to a serious illness he had just recovered from, some type of intestinal infection. And he recovered, and he was so thankful and grateful to have survived that. And he himself thought it might be terminal, even though it didn't end up being so. And so that's sort of that hymn is kind of sort of the centerpiece of this quartet, and it has unbelievable compassion, unbelievable expression, on the verge of sentimentality without being sentimental. And then and then he contrasts that with this the contrasting sections are almost like party music, but in a very dignified and stately way versus a total animation. This is I personally have had a lot of experience with this quartet. I studied it in school with Robert Mann of the Juilliard Quartet, the founding member, first violinist, when I was a student there, and we just recorded it with the Cleveland Orchestra with Franz Welzer Must, and toured with it as well. And it's an unbelievably it's an A minor, which is one of the most the feeling of loss and romantic searching all the time, the urgency that you find. And it's such a dramatic contrasting, and then you have the beautiful A major second movement, very much in a waltz feel. You have that great recitative, the very short fourth movement, which leads into the fifth. And then if you're a cellist, you're very familiar with the last page, because it throws you way up in the high register of the instrument after playing 40 minutes in the low register, which but no, it's obviously one of the great works of chamber music. I recommend two recordings, again from the 40s. One of my favorite quartets of all time is the Budapest String Quartet. I love the way they make music, but the earlier rendition, this is from the Library of Congress recordings in the 40s. The reproduction of sound is pretty good. I find their playing very revelatory. And a second opinion of that would be the Juilliard String Quartet from the 1983 CBS Masterworks, in the formation with Robert Mann on first violin, Earl Carlos second, Sam Rhodes, and Joel Krosnick.
Oh, wow.
Teacher, Joel Krosnick.
Okay, very nice. I will definitely have to check those out. I'm particularly, I know the Opus 132. I don't know if I had heard those or not, because you listen to a lot, but I think it's particularly relevant to our times, as you were saying, because of the struggle with harsh conditions right now, and then combining with the compassion and empathy at the same time. I think that could be highly resonant to people. So
absolutely, and you're right. There, the A minor writing is there's almost a desperate urgency that going on, and there is a harshness about it in the expression.
Right.
And yet there's all these contrasts with if they're memories or foreshadowing or the future can be, but the major music is so idealistic and is always showing what the world can be, or at least promoting the world to be more that way.
Hmm. That's wonderful. I think we need a little bit of that right now.
Yes, absolutely, without question.
Wonderful. Okay, and for your fifth recommendation.
Number five, we're moving forward in history to a composer named Felix Mendelssohn, one of the greatest works of chamber music ever written. At age 16, his octet for 8 string instruments. And I mean, it's pretty much inspiration from beginning to end. And the combination of just how unified, first of all, a piece for 8 instruments can be in concept, in the writing, and yet with all the concept or all the contrasts and animation, imagination that you would expect for Mendelssohn. He was one of the greatest child prodigies as a composer. I mean, he had a gift like Mozart, and like few composers ever have had in terms of the heights and the level of composition that he could achieve at a young age. Uh, and so this is one of the true great works of chamber music. I knew of this recording, but I actually never seriously listened to it, and I was absolutely floored. Not surprisingly, given the cast, Jascha Heifetz, William Primrose, and Gregor Piatigorsky, the kind of the gold standards of that era for soloists, but in chamber music, and also that you can hear just the willingness of everybody to really do what's best for the music and not be the all-star soloist trying to outplay each other. No, it's nothing like that. And not that Jascha Heifetz needs any support and being remembered in history, but I hear so many, of course, he's famous for the people who are the naysayers. Oh, he's cold, everything's too fast. And okay, I mean, you can argue tempo, this and that, but have you ever not looked at him when he's playing and actually listened to what's coming out of the violin? That is not cold playing. I'm sorry. I mean, there's nothing cold about it. And fast, yes. I mean, in recorded history, what happened? If you actually listen to recordings from the 40s and the 30s and the 20s, the tempos get faster and faster. And as we move forward in time through the 20th century, the recordings got slower. And I think there were different reasons for that. Some are the great generation of musicians aging. Some is the expanded recording technology, which allowed to pick up more fine details, greater sense of space, which if you have space, you might want to use it, and take more time to enhance details in the work and just record in a different way. And so what finally happened in the 80s is things were getting really slow. So, and if you look at the two most famous conductors commercially of all time, Herbert von Karajan and Leonard Bernstein, they were getting old.
Yes.
And Karajan had some strokes, and Leonard Bernstein, and they just simply slowed down, and their interpretations slowed down, and there were others too. And the 80s was a time of power and sound and expanding the volume range. And finally what happened is there was a revolt. and it was, I think, led by the period movement, by John Eliot Gardner and Gustav Leonhardt, or who am I thinking of? Roger Norrington.
Oh, yeah.
That's what I'm thinking of. So those two and others, that to try to take some of the romantic weight off of, especially the early romanticism, the classical period and stuff. And then now we're in a time when people want to play fast. It's kind of gone full circle. Now we're playing faster again, like 100 years ago. But of course, with modern technology and of course the level of playing on instrumental playing being higher than ever before, and also the ability to capture sound at a level like never before. So, but things, life is cyclical. what's popular goes out of clothing wise. Some 60s style things are now in fashion again when I was in high school would have been laughed at. And so, it's just, part of the times. But anyway, going back to the Mendelssohn octet, you're not going to find better string playing. The greatest of the golden age are still hard to beat. That
Sure.
elite group of people. And then I offer a second recording that a friend of mine brought me to that is stunning for a lot of different reasons. One not being any less than the fact that it's one person playing all 8 parts. I don't know if you're familiar with Malin Broman, who is the director of the Swedish Radio Symphony.
Hmm.
And she recorded herself playing all the violin parts, all the viola parts, and the cello parts. And that's what blows me away. Violin, viola, fine.
Wow.
Cello? If you're a violinist?
Oh,
And she does a credible job too.
yeah.
And recording on top of herself, and then superimposing. So at first you look at the octet and you're like, fine, then it's like, wait a minute, everybody has the same face. They're all her. And, not only, you could call it a stunt, fine, but interpretively it's brilliant. It's musically on the highest level. I couldn't believe it. And so this is worth checking out. I think it has made a big splash on YouTube, and rightfully so. So it's definitely worth hearing.
Well, you've really piqued my curiosity with that, because something like that could have sounded sort of canned or contrived. But
Right.
it doesn't, based on what you're saying, it doesn't seem like that's the issue at all. Uh,
No,
that
no.
it's a really, an amazing performance. And so in some senses, you can have a person, if you have one person doing it with modern technology, at least there's unanimity of voice and interpretation that so often one is after with chamber music,
Right.
or some kind of agreement.
And I was thinking to myself, well, of course the ensemble's perfect. It's easy to play with yourself. And then the next question is it?
No, I don't know if it
Well,
is.
maybe only if you're void of inner conflict, but
Yeah, that's a
no.
really interesting question.
Yes,
Wonderful.
and it's so this is it's a brilliant, highly artistic COVID-19 project that she did.
Sure. Okay. Well, definitely something worth checking out. So
Absolutely.
did you have any more, or how many more do we have?
Well, I made a list of 10,
Okay.
10 composers, and so we would be, I guess, halfway through,
Yeah.
but I can go quicker on these.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's go through. Yeah.
So,
I'm probably talking.
absolutely. So now we look at Frederick Chopin.
Hmm.
I think we should include some piano music, Chopin being one of the greatest composers of piano music. Themes of heroism, his great Polonaise in A flat major, I would recommend, and also the famous F sharp major Barcarolle he wrote at the end of his life. Uh, Again, the ideals of triumph over struggles, romantic era music. The 2 pianists I recommend, Arthur Rubinstein, the famous NBC video of him playing in 1956, in the days where networks carried classical music,
Yeah.
regular networks, not only PBS. And then Evgeny Kissin, uh,
Oh, yeah.
who I heard play these pieces live at the late 90s, and this recording's from 1999, RCA Victor. Stunning, just stunning.
Well, I honestly have never been disappointed in anything he's done, but
No,
yeah.
just hard to get him booked because he doesn't play by choice. He doesn't perform as many concerts as he used to. So,
Yeah. Hmm. Wonderful. Okay.
and now we move to Franz Schubert, and I thought we need some leader. We need some songs of
Yeah.
Schubert, and this would be for people again who are are not are feeling comfortable enough to look at pieces about that express loss and loneliness, such as the famous song Der Erlkönig, and also Gute Nacht from the Die Winterreise, and 2 of the great male singers, legendary singers, Dietrich Fischer-Dieskau and Fritz Wunderlich. I would they come to mind for Schubert Lieder without even thinking at all. So I would highly recommend them for these Lieder, and also for Schubert's music, the famous, especially for people who may not know Schubert's music so much, if you want to really experience the underlying sadness of Schubert, but in the most beautiful and even positively expressive way, since it's in a major key, the Impromptu Number 3 for piano in G flat major.
Oh, I love that piece.
Yes, and there's a recording. Be careful; it might make you cry. If you're sensitive, if you're the sensitive type, Christian Zimmerman from the early '80s is I would recommend listening to.
Okay, that's wonderful. Yeah, that piece can definitely be dangerous.
Yes.
I have a small set of just patently dangerous pieces of music that are emotionally um, intense, and that
Yes.
I think that one's wonderful. What a great suggestion. Thank you.
Yes, I mean Schubert. You have to include something. One of the
Well,
great
and
composers.
Schubert, I mean, I can't think of a better composer for melody. I
Right.
mean, he is uh, the melodies. They're just even when they're not sung. I mean, they're instrumental melodies, but everything could be sung. So
Exactly. The quality, as melodies came as easy to him as it did to Mozart and Tchaikovsky.
yeah, yeah.
And moving on to the eighth composer, well, not eighth composer, but eighth. Well, I have it listed as eight, but now we're probably a few more pieces than that. But anyway, the next piece, Johannes Brahms. I have two pieces of Brahms. They're both works of chamber music. One is for inspiration, and the other is for exploring the dark side of romanticism. The inspiring piece would be his first piano trio, Opus 8, in the revised version that is mostly performed from 1889, the B major trio, which I don't know a more beautiful piano trio. Maybe there isn't one ever written. I mean, that's about as beautiful as it gets. B major being a key of wild emotions, passions.
Yeah.
And then, of course, this trio, I just performed it last week in Chicago, but the constant dichotomy between B major, B minor, the movements go major, minor, major, and then it actually ends in B minor, which is very unusual for a composition in a major key. By
Yes.
and B minor being a key that often represents the resignation to one's fate.
Mm.
And so this struggle, but you'll and material-wise too, get even separate from the keys. You have the most beautiful melodic, singing, heartfelt lines, and then you have all kinds of heroism in the triplets and the dotted rhythms to be found throughout the trio. And then I have probably my two favorite recordings of this trio would be, have you ever heard the Julius Katchen, Joseph Suk, Janos Starker recording?
Okay. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, and that's really, I mean, Julius Katchen is one of the greatest pianists ever for Brahms. I mean, he's just really was an amazing musician, and of course, the other two aren't too bad either, to put it mildly. So we have that trio for one suggestion. Oh, I'm sorry. I have three suggestions for this. So I have my three, because it's funny. I said I had my two favorites, and I was thinking while I said that, I'm like, well, actually, I have three favorites, and so I listed them all. So the second one would be Rubinstein, Heifetz, Feuermann,
Okay.
and they were known as the $1 Million Trio, and there's a reason for that. So we still have the advantage of Feuermann before his untimely death. Heifetz, it's worth noting, wouldn't play with any other cellist for years upon the death of Feuermann, and until he finally paired up with Piatigorsky.
I didn't know that. That's interesting.
Yes, and Feuermann was the only cellist of the time who could literally, technically keep up with Heifetz. I mean, he played the cello. The famous Feuermann debut recital in I think was it in town hall, I think. Yeah, late 30s. And at intermission, everybody went to the phones, and they all called everybody they could know, and there were, 3 times as many people in the second half because nobody had ever heard a cellist who could play, the upper register like a violin. I mean, with the
Yes.
utmost ease. And I once asked Starker because he heard Feuermann play in Budapest when he was 11, and I said, "So what did you think?" And he says, "What do you mean? What did I think? I was 11 years old. I thought finally somebody who can play the cello."
That's that's quite
As
the yeah.
as only a Starker could deliver, but. So anyway, so that would be my second. That is just, and the way Heifetz plays the Brahms, it's so heartfelt and actually nothing showy about it. It's a complete dedication to the music. And then my third recording would be Dave Myra Hess, Isaac Stern, and Pablo Casals.
Wow. Okay. Another.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that, I mean, the three of them. I mean, and of course, and for any cellist who might be listening, I will point out that, how many million years old is Casals in this recording. So, I mean, technically it's not on the absolute highest modern standard, but if you ever have any doubt as to how great of a cellist technically Casals was, there was a publication around 2000 on CD remastering one of his first recordings from 1917, and it's filled with all these little encore showpieces, and both technical ones and slow lyrical ones. And he plays the crap out of the cello in that recording because he was 59 years old there. He wasn't 150, It's and he does it but while playing the crap out of the cello, he does it with the most gorgeous tone and the most profound expression, and the combination, very few have ever achieved that.
Well, and that does bring up an interesting point, and it's something that I talk about with my musician friends all the time, faculty or performers. Sometimes there can be performances that are technically perfect, but they just leave you cold because the passion isn't quite there. I mean, it's sort of there in its little box, and it's fine. But there are times when I would almost rather hear a performance that has heart and maybe a mistake or two, as opposed to one that is just perfect all the time.
Yes, and there's all the recordings I'm recommending are great. The greatest musicians who allowed themselves to be vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
And in other words, to truly play from the inside out, you have to open yourself up to the world, to the people you're playing for, and it is in a way, quote unquote, more dangerous. But it's right. I mean, what's great about it though is if you are thinking in the right way, what happens is whatever mistakes you make, because everybody's going to make mistakes, whatever mistakes you make matter much less because you have people focused on the message of the music rather than the mistakes you make.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah.
But that's for another talk on
Yes.
performance practice or performance psychology.
Yes. I'd love to do that at a different time.
Yeah, but I as well. And then moving on to my second Brahms piece, the dark side, the key of F minor, almost as Christian Schubart said in his treatise on the meaning of keys. He talks about how it's almost like unbearable state of mind, almost begging for impending death. I mean, it's so dark. I mean, but this piece of Brahms, and again, so there's a severity, there's a tragedy, there's a angst, there's an anger in this music, but at the same time, it's like the second movement in A flat major, like for Beethoven, that's a key of universal brotherhood. It's like the second movement of the Fifth Symphony, and here it's one of the most gorgeous, idealistic, music pieces of music. This slow movement of the piano quintet that you'll ever hear. Wait, that might be am I flipping that with the scherzo movement? I can't remember offhand now which one comes first. I think the
Boy,
scherzo
I'm
movement.
on the
This might
spot.
be the third. I think it's the third movement I'm talking.
Okay,
The second one
but
is
I
the third.
love the piano quintet, so I'm so glad you
Yes.
chose that.
Yes, I mean it's widely regarded by many as his greatest work of chamber music, and I think
Mhm.
the richness of harmonic invention, the scope and range of expression, and the unbelievable drama that he creates, yeah, together is. I mean, there's a reason, and he struggled with this piece. He first wrote it as a, believe it or not, as a two cello quintet.
Ooh,
And then he revised and rewrote it for four hands on piano, and then finally arrived at this piano quintet. And I think this was during the period where he was also struggling to write, you know, the D minor piano concerto and his first symphony, because it was, you know, his creations, and to never lived up to his own expectations for a long time. And so there's so much that went into this piano quintet, so that it really, he struggled in its you know, creation as much as there is struggle in the music. So it kind of is fitting. But no, it's an unbelievable piece. But again, a little more severe, and I wouldn't call it easy listening.
no.
But you know what I wanted to say about this quintet? What I wanted to say is that this is the classical musician's response to, like, as though somebody would go to a rock concert, like
Yeah.
where the music is so loud and everybody goes crazy and screams. This is that in classical music.
Okay. Wonderful.
And then my last selection is, I thought, you know, I'm a cellist. I've not only principal cello of the Cleveland Orchestra, but also soloist and chamber musician. How can I not include a cello solo piece on the list? So I took the Dvorak Cello Concerto, which
Mm,
is probably a top three concerto ever written by any composer. Um, Pretty much everything is in that piece. It's a symphony. It's really a symphony concertante. There's so many other solos in the piece by other instruments than the cello soloist, and it has yeah, everything in it. It's going the other direction from the B major trio, starting in B minor and triumphing at the end in B major.
yeah.
Um, there is you know, a homesickness. He was in New York City when he wrote this concerto. He was longing to be back in Bohemia, his native land, and so he felt isolated, maybe in a way that we feel isolated during COVID-19. Um, and while he was writing this in the middle, this may be something that has happened to some misfortune to perhaps people watching. He lost a loved one. The sister of his wife died in the middle of writing this piece, or close to when he finished, actually. And then he went back and revised the entire ending of the third movement, because actually he was kind of secretly always in love with her, his
Oh,
wife's sister, which is maybe an uncomfortable thing to think about. The greatest cello concerto ever written is in that context, but nevertheless, I believe he always kept things proper with everyone. And yeah, the last page, the ending, the coda of the concerto is definitely about her ascension into the next world. And you have, again, there's a funeral march there, and the cello climbs to the top and plays the most gloriously beautiful theme. But it ends in the most heroic fashion too, and it's almost like the human will to never give up, which actually was Sir George Schulte's motto, was never give up. And that was always, as a performing artist. So I highly recommend the Dvorak Cello Concerto. It's, again, overall, I mean, I talk about these inner things going on, but it's an incredibly inspirational work in the most
mm,
uplifting way overall. Truls Mork, Maris Janssens, who was at one point music director of the Pittsburgh Symphony, and the Oslo Philharmonic in a 1993 recording, is one of the best Dvorak cello concerto recordings I know. Um,
That's great. I heard Charles Mark do it at Blossom with
Yes.
Cleveland,
Hmm.
uh, which it was a performance I absolutely loved. But go ahead. I'm sorry, I don't mean to
And
interrupt.
then my second opinion on the Dvorak concerto would be my teacher and mentor Janos Starker with Antal Dorati and the London Symphony Orchestra on a Mercury Living Presence recording. He has a later one also with Leonard Slatkin, which is superb. But there's a level of energy and intensity that Dorati and he bring to that recording that is really electrifying.
Oh, wonderful. And honestly, I'm really glad, especially as a cellist, that you brought up the Dvorak because despite some people who will complain about how it's performed all the time, personally, I'm really glad it's performed all the time because I love the piece. Um, but I'm so glad you brought it up because that piece also, the first movement and so many other parts, even the second, third, there's a nostalgia there and a wistfulness. The second theme in the first movement, um, that's one of those dangerous themes to me.
Yes.
That's a piece that if you're in the mood to sort of revel in nostalgia, but in a safe way because it's a piece of music, it's not exactly real nostalgia, which could really tear you up. I think that to me is one of the most incredible pieces for that. And then the last movement, the duo between the cello and the violin, that is heavenly. I mean, that is just so gorgeous.
Yeah, that whole
Uh,
transition into B major there
yeah,
is, yeah, it's transporting. And then that great cadence right before the brass cadence before
yeah,
the coda is overwhelming. It really is.
yeah,
The excitement that it builds. But you mentioned, you're right, that nostalgia found throughout the concerto, but starting with that second theme, the introduction with the horn, and then when the solo cello plays it. Yeah, there's nothing more pure in music in terms of heartfelt, genuine nostalgia. That it's so right in its way.
yeah. No, that's great. So yeah, I don't know. Some people may not want to listen to nostalgic music right now because it'll just send them off the edge. But on the other hand, maybe
But
it
I
be
Yes,
therapeutic.
and I will offer in the case of this nostalgia, it's really in a positive way because I mean, even though it's so nostalgic, it's the outlook is very is positive, and I think in his mind he's thinking this is very much a possibility.
Yeah,
It's not the kind of nostalgia that you'll never be able, the music is telling you that is happened then, and it can never happen again. It's not there's no sort of inability to achieve what he's longing for.
well, that's a really wonderful distinction and maybe a great way to approach it. So, well, thank you so much for sharing all of these wonderful listening items, and I hope everyone who takes the time to watch this and will take a chance, and listen to these recordings. I think they're absolutely wonderful pieces and things that will be emotionally significant and uplifting, or at least in mirroring people's feelings at this horrible, weird time. So,
Absolutely. And the next time we're talking about recorded listening, I'll move forward into modern history from Dvorak and Brahms.
sure,
Because
I
that's
would.
but I thought this is the place to start. These are
Yeah,
this is sort of the breadbasket of classical music. And then of course um, there comes the issue of the purpose of music. I mean, sometimes music is just meant, I mean, as you could use something like the Mendelssohn octet for just to have fun. I mean, it can
yeah,
just doesn't have to be, so serious. And I mean, I'm talking about, and some of these pieces are really serious, but at the same time, yeah, there's music for all needs and all occasions and in all genres. So that's why we're just lucky to have it and to enjoy and celebrate all of it, and choose what we need to hear when we need to hear it.
No, that's wonderful. Um, well, thank you very much.